In this week's episode of Studio Inter, we'll be reviewing the win against Benevento and the draw against Lazio. We'll be reviewing the Mercato with David Amoyal from Marzio's English page, our season predictions, this week's Moggi, Moratti and Frog, and much, much more. Everything here on Studio Inter, only on SempreInter.com. Benvenuti, bentornati to another edition of Studio Inter. The Mercato just closed about an hour and a half ago when we're recording this. It's been a very intense Mercato, and we, as always, we're very happy that whenever Inter's Mercato in the summer closed, it's become like a tradition to invite our first guest on. He's the host of the excellent Calcioland podcast. He's also the English manager of Marzio's page. Welcome, Mr. David Amoyal.
It's a great pleasure to be with you guys. What a nice tradition to chat about Inter's Mercato right after the window. So great to be with you guys. Thanks so much for having me.
It's our pleasure. And we're also joined by the SempreInter.com preview writer, Mr. Mohammed Nassar. How are you?
I am very well. Thank you very much. Very excited about this episode. So looking forward to it.
And we're also joined by our good friend, Mr. William Beckman. How are you?
All good, Nima. Hoping that this is not the last episode of Studio Inter before Serie A 2020-2021 implodes and ceases to exist as more and more protocols are ripped up and ruined and people become positive and the domino effect kills us all. But other than that, pretty positive.
On that happy note, we're also joined by our good friend from The Athletic over in Texas, I'm going to say, because I always get Houston and Dallas mixed up. So I'm just going to go with Texas because that's the right state. Mr. Mike Pialucci.
Keep it broad. I like it. Who's ready for a full metal half season of Raja and Arturo Vidal together? I'm pumped. Let's do it.
You see that I'm really happy about that. And let's get right to it because I've not been happy about this Mercato at all. Because I think it's been very underwhelming given how it started, but based on the financial realities and also Antonio Conte and all that, I really want to ask you something, David, before we get to the listener questions, which we have quite a few for you, because every time we have you on, people want to ask you all sorts. My question is, how did you view this whole thing with Conte after the Atalanta game, the peace talks, and then the change of strategy that Inter underwent? Because as you're well aware, the past 4 or 5 years, Suning and Inter have always spoken about, and Marotta have been speaking about, long-term, young, homegrown. That's changed now. It's Kolarov and Vidal and Darmian, which are not homegrown or at least they're not very young. How do you view that? And do you think that this puts extra pressure on Inter to win the Scudetto this season?
Yeah. So I would say it's been very interesting, the dynamic of the Mercato, because obviously Inter got off to a gangbuster start with Hakimi, which, I think all things considered is probably the best addition for any team in Serie A this summer. So, I know it's been a little bit underwhelming after that. I think, you can make a case for Osimhen at Napoli. He's looked good. But we knew Hakimi was going to be a home run for Inter. And what he's shown on the pitch is that he probably is the best new addition in Serie A. To me, it kind of reminds me a little of when Salah went to Fiorentina, just took the league by storm. But you are right. After that, right after that meeting with Conte and Zhang, it came out that Inter had basically no money to spend on the market. They withdraw essentially from the Tonali race. Watch them go to Inter. And I don't know what Zhang said to Conte, but I think he won that meeting. I think there's no way around it. He retained his coach. The dynamic on the transfer market on paper, you would have said these are exactly a lot of the things that would make Conte flip out. Now, granted, they did bring him in Vidal there, which was a nice move as well. But, if I look at Inter's Mercato, my thought is that if Inter doesn't win the Scudetto, then it's a problem, because in my opinion, you look at Inter in recent years, they had Zaniolo, sacrificed them for Nainggolan. They could have had Kulusevski. He ends up going to Juve. They had Tonali reserved for months. He goes to Milan. They had Kumbulla reserved as well. Granted, Skriniar stayed, so you didn't really need him, but he ends up going to Roma. And these are, I would say, among some of the best talents we've had in Serie A in recent years. So if you pass on those and you're like, okay, we're going to go more for the veteran type, to me, you have to win. But, I look at Inter, the additions they've made, and I go back to January, I kind of count Eriksen as well. I always evaluate transfer moves on, are the additions you're making good enough to play regularly on the teams you're competing with or trying to catch up to? And Inter has their sights on Juve. They add Hakimi and Vidal. I think both those guys could start for Juve. They added Eriksen, who I think, tactically it's been an issue fitting him in at Inter, but quality-wise, it's a great player. He could start at Juve. So I like what Inter's done overall. I think they've set themselves up to go all in and win the Scudetto this year. But if they don't, and look, it's a big positive ending Juve's 10-year streak, we could look back at this year, starting back to January with Kulusevski, as really sacrificing too much short-term and giving up on the long-term.
For sure. I'm going to hand you over to Mo now. Do you have a question for David?
Yeah, I did, particularly about the Raja Nainggolan case. So we know that there are reports about his alleged discontent with the projected playing time that he's going to receive under Conte. And this was why he apparently was pushing for a move back to Cagliari, despite the economic terms not being favorable to the Inter management. Do you reckon that, all other things being equal, if you were in charge of Inter's transfer policy, would you offload a fiery character like Nainggolan unfavorably, knowing that he could be upset with the role that he gets to play in the coming 4, 6, 3, however many months until he leaves the club? Or do you think that his quality will inevitably become useful to the Scudetto push, at least in the early parts of the season?
Yeah, so I'll say this, that I'm intrigued by Nainggolan staying. I thought maybe that sub that we saw him and Vidal coming on the pitch together would end up just being like a meme for one game, saying, oh, look at the muscular midfield for Inter, what could have been. I'm pretty intrigued by it. I would try to see and work it out to see what he can do through January, because, in my opinion, it's not like he's at Juve, Higuain, Matuidi, Khedira. I mean, those players were basically done, and they just didn't want them on their payroll. They really didn't want them around their team altogether. I don't get the vibe that to me, Nainggolan definitely has a little bit left. He showed at Cagliari he did well. We know last year he really wanted to prove himself at Inter, and I feel like now he'll have a chance. Granted, that midfield really is stacked. I think Inter, had the offer from Cagliari, been enough to cover his amortized value and be totally done. Maybe would have been happy to move on, but I think I'm cautiously optimistic. Even for Nainggolan, this is a good opportunity for him. We know he hates Juve competing against them. So I think they have until now in January to see kind of where his head's at and see if he can help out or not.
Mike, did you have a question for David?
I do. Big fan of the podcast, David. Thanks for being here with us. I wanted to ask you something a little more forward-facing. I think if you were asked to identify kind of a bigger picture need, not now, but maybe as soon as next summer for Inter, it probably would be a true heir to Samir Handanovic. It's a guy who, of course, I know from listening to your pod that you named him the best, Serie A keeper of the last decade. I would agree with you. My question is, if you're Inter and you are looking, let's just say in Italy, because there are a lot of goalkeepers around the world, but if you're looking in Italy, who would you go after? Would it be Cragno? Would it be Alex Barret? Would it be Juan Musso, who's always a popular target among Inter favorites? Who would be the person you'd set your sights on? And do you see someone domestically besides like a Donnarumma, who isn't coming here, who has the potential to be as good as what Handanovic was from 11 through about 19 or 20 or so?
Sure, no, great question. Look, and I didn't mention it at the beginning, kind of my observation as a whole. I mean, look, I think a lot changed for Inter with Lautaro not being sold. I think in their mind, they thought there was a decent chance that could happen, and with COVID, it didn't. So I feel like a lot went back to the drawing board, with the keeper being one of them, because they didn't bring in Radu to be the backup now. I definitely think he's an upgrade on the backups they had last year. But I think this year, had COVID not happened, had they maybe moved on from Lautaro, I think they would have done similar to what Juve did. They bring in Szczesny basically a year before he's the starter. He's kind of a deluxe backup for Buffon, and then gets the starter's title. I think Marotta wanted to do the same at Inter. I think they would have loved to bring in Musso from Udinese, and I think he's excellent. He's Argentine, checks a ton of boxes. Handanovic came from Udinese. I mean, it really checks a lot of boxes. I think they would have done it this year, but obviously Lautaro didn't go. Inter had to watch their money. I think you get either Cragno or Musso, you're getting really great players. Obviously, Inter have a great relationship with Cagliari. I think Cragno, and Inter has gone more Italian. That would be a really nice addition. I rate Cragno slightly higher than Musso, though Musso is really good as well. So, yeah, I agree. Next season, that's definitely something to look at. Handanovic, I think it's very easy to, highlight his mistakes, but he's still excellent. I think every time he makes a mistake, people bring up his age, but even Donnarumma makes mistakes. So I wouldn't overreact. I think for this season, he's fine, but after that, absolutely.
Will, did you have a question for David before we go to the listener questions?
Yes. I'd like to go to the opposite end of the pitch, if I could, David. Do you think Inter are covered in attack? We've heard a lot of talk today being Monday, that there was a Gervinho-Pinamonti swap deal with that Parma that could have gone through, but for which there wasn't enough time. I think Conte said yesterday that Lukaku, Sanchez, Lautaro and Pinamonti is the minimum that he would need for a long season in which Inter are expected to play every 3 days. So do you think Inter are a little bit short there? And if they are, do you think they could have found something that's clearly better than Pinamonti? Because I think if you're looking at gaps that are in the squad, while there's a lot of depth, there is still of having a very clear, credible backup to Lukaku, who did well to play most of the games last season and would do even better to do so this year, given that everything is going to be compressed together even more than it was last year.
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, in an ideal world, would you like to have a backup that plays similar to Lukaku? I mean, Petagna would have been a fantastic signing, in my opinion, to back him up, or veteran like Giroud, someone that can play that classic number 9. I mean, we know last year Inter were looking at Zico potentially as a backup, and think of how much the financial situation has changed. So I agree. There's definitely not ideal a backup to Lukaku. I will say Alexis Sanchez has been really sensational. I think ultimately, say Lukaku, knock on wood, because I really like him. I expect a huge season from him. Say he were out for a short amount of time, I would imagine Lautaro would be the main striker, with maybe Sanchez and Eriksen flanking him a little bit more. Have to be a different look, but I would say having the Alexis Sanchez that Inter has this year certainly feels like a different player when he arrived. So while it would have been nice to have a Petagna type to back up Lukaku, in a way it also can be kind of intriguing to have a completely different look offensively if you need it. So I wouldn't say it's a huge issue, but definitely something to watch.
For sure. We have a few questions from some listeners who already it's kind of what we touched on, but one of them is one person is at GERSII21, Jersey Hoffman, who asks, do you think Inter will regret missing out on Tonali? And do you think is it due to tactical choice or misguided transfer strategy? I'd like to add in Kumbulla into that as well.
Yeah. I mean, look, I like Tonali. There's no doubt about it. And look, he hasn't been in great physical shape, but he has shown some flashes at Milan where you're like, okay, this guy definitely has. There's a top player somewhere in there. But I also would say it's not that he had a great second half to the season. It almost felt like maybe he was coasting a little bit after he had established himself in Serie A. I would say Inter, to me, if Sensi can somehow stay healthy and become a player that you can get, let's say 25 starts a season in Serie A, I have to be honest, I don't see a huge difference. I mean, Sensi for a while last year, we were talking about him as the best new addition in Serie A. I love Barella. It was an absolute home run. So it's not like Inter hasn't brought and they're Italian as well, which for some people matters. So I have to say the one that I could see maybe even more than Tonali is Kulusevski because he's at Juve. And Kumbulla definitely it would have been a nice fit. I think had Inter lost Skriniar, Kumbulla, I think, would have been a fantastic replacement because in a lot of ways he's the opposite of Skriniar. He's tailor-made for that Conte-type defense. He's, more of a finesse, Barzagli type defender than a brute force. So I think Kumbulla, say Skriniar had left and Inter didn't replace him with Kumbulla, yeah, that would have been a big problem. But, hopefully Skriniar will now be for years to stay at Inter. I think, we could be looking at De Vrij, Bastoni, and him leading Inter's defense for a really long time. And at that point, not too many regrets. So I'll say Tonali, it's possible, but I have faith in Sensi. He might be able to kind of make up for that. And again, with Barella there, Inter has done well overall with Italian midfielders.
At Parmesh SRIV, Parmeshwar Srivastava, he asks us, how would you rate Inter's Mercato? And do you think Inter need a left wing back? And should they have pushed harder for maybe Emerson Palmieri or Marcos Alonso?
Yeah, I mean, I think Marcos Alonso or Emerson, either of them, would have been certainly nice additions. Obviously, they know Conte. Marcos Alonso in an emergency can also play center back. But what I will say is that Hakimi is such a superb addition at right wing that, in my opinion, even if Inter kind of get by with what they have, in my opinion, they are still massively upgraded on the wings. So yeah, I mean, this will be a good target for January, but I think Ashley Young's been serviceable. Let's see what else Conte comes up with there. We know Chelsea was just very, very tough to negotiate with. I also have a feeling they probably didn't want to make their former coach's life as easy as possible. So maybe a loan, they were like, no. So let's see in January. But overall, I think Inter's Mercato, again, I go back to if the goal was to bridge the gap with Juve, I would say absolutely mission accomplished. Juve certainly did some favors with the coaching change and not having a great window, although they did pretty well. So again, I think they had the best new addition in all of Serie A. Hakimi, Vidal already paying dividends. They have great depth. They got Sanchez on a really good deal. So no, I think if I'm an Inter fan, you have to be really happy. I think the only thing that I would say probably the worst was having to sacrifice Godin, who had played well at the end of the season. But they ultimately decided the money of those wages were better spent on Vidal. Keeping Skriniar might make them win that bet. So I think there's maybe a little bit of disappointment because kind of Inter's market, ending with Darmian Sheridan isn't a high note. But overall, I still think it's a great window. And, you can build upon that great Europa League run. Lautaro looks rejuvenated. So, no, I think an Inter fan should be very happy with how all this worked out.
Well, that's great. So now I'm going to ask you to do two things. I'm going to ask you to give Inter a rating from 1 to 10, the classic Italian voto. And then I'm going to ask you to predict the season from 1 to 7 and give us relegation candidates, capocannoniere, who will win Coppa Italia, and who will win Supercoppa. But let's start with a voto. How do you think Inter did? 1 to 10 on the Mercato.
I'm gonna go 7.5. I'm gonna go again. You know the reasons. On the positive, it was tough to sell for everyone, but I think Inter did well. I also like that they brought back Radu, Inamonte. I think they clearly have depth. And I go back to we saw in that first match the great players they got off the bench. What's changed from last year, if you remember that first game against Juve, once Sensi came out and they went to Vicino, the game was essentially over. That will not happen this year if Inter has to go to the bench. So I give it a 7.5. They improved. They added the best new addition in Serie A. They didn't really lose anyone that they wanted to keep. So this is a very good window, in my opinion.
Cool. And then from positions 1 to 6, or no, yeah, because that's the European places. 1 to 6 Serie A, and also who the 3 relegation candidates.
Sure. So I will say this on my podcast. I picked Inter to win over Juve, not by a big amount, but I have to say the way Atalanta has been playing recently kind of gives me second thoughts. And also I want to kind of keep Napoli in the Scudetto mix. I really like what they've done this summer. So I'll go Inter 1, Juve 2, Atalanta 3. In my opinion, that's kind of the Scudetto race. I'm going to have Napoli 4th, but I really, really like what they did. Koulibaly staying. Osimhen looks really like a great addition for them. So to me, those are my top. I know this is an Inter podcast, but I do like what Milan's done. I think I think today they're going a little bit too crazy because they didn't get a center back, but I like what the team's done there. I feel like there's a dark cloud hanging all over Lazio since season didn't end well. They didn't get David Silva, but at the end of the day, they kept everyone. They did improve their depth. So I'll tell you what, I'll put Lazio 5th, Milan 6th, and then Roma. Again, Roma with Zaniolo out. I know they brought back Smalling. I like their young backs, but I think this is a team that without Zaniolo is a year away. So that's my top. As far as the relegation race, I think it would be easy to say all the teams that were recently promoted to Serie A, although Benevento looks pretty intriguing. Parma was very active at the end of the window, but they went for a lot of young players, which the race to avoid relegation can backfire. So I think they will be in that mix. I think Sampdoria more than Genoa. I like Genoa's window a little bit more. So I think those teams need to worry. I will say there's one team that I think people have buried too much and have them as a contender for relegation. This is Verona. I'm actually pretty high on Verona. I think they will be the surprise team. And I'll say it on your podcast. They said it on mine as well. I think Verona finishes ahead of Fiorentina this season.
Who do you think? So what about Capocannoniere, Coppa Italia, and Supercoppa? Just quickly.
So I'm all in on Lukaku. I love him this season. I think with Hakimi, Lukaku had a monster season. With Hakimi will be even better. So I'll pick him for Capocannoniere. And the Coppa Italia, I'm giving the Scudetto to Inter already. So I'll give Pirlo a trophy his first season. How's that?
Okay, nice one. Thank you so much for coming on, David. And I know you do so much. And have you got anything in particular you want to plug right now, or whatever? The floor is yours. If go for it.
Hey, I love your show. Thanks for having me, guys. I love all the work you guys do, the previews, your dedication's fantastic. So, yeah, if you enjoy my coverage of transfers, we're going to recap them on this week on Calcioland. I'll write quite a few articles, and then we'll cover Serie A there. So, yeah, that's where you'll hear me mainly. And I write now because freelance work's a little bit on hiatus. If you want to become a patron on Calcioland, I'll have some articles there as well. But it was a real pleasure being on with you guys. Thank you so much. Keep up the fantastic work. I love your dedication and all the great stuff coming from the site.
Thank you so much, David, and right back at you. Really appreciate everything, all your support for us through the years, for the site, the podcast, everything, and also your great work. Thank you, David.
Take
Ciao.
Ciao, ciao. Right,
Bye.
that was David Amoyal. I'm going to quickly go through all of us. So I'm going to say, I want us to quickly, Mo, 1 to 10, Inter's Mercato, and a brief explanation why. And then I'm going to go around and I'll have all of us do it. And then we'll do the same with the rest of the stuff.
Yeah, I think a strong 7 is where I'm at. I think it's been a very good mercato. Very good mercato. I think the only issue is probably we should have sold a bit more than we did towards the end. Offloaded some of players that are excess capacity. But in terms of additions, I think depth, for all the reasons that David articulated so well, I think depth mainly, and the fact that we have the Serie A's best incomer makes that the incoming additions are strong. It's just the outgoing, maybe we fell a bit short.
Yeah. What about you, Will?
7 as well. I think the squad is stronger than it was before the Mercato started. There's at least 2 players for every role, so squad depth is good. I think that's improved on last season. I think Lautaro and Sanchez can almost be considered 2. Well, Sanchez is a signing, and Lautaro is sort of half a signing because he was linked to Barcelona for about 6 months. There's a clear upgrade at right wing back, swapping Candreva for Hakimi. I think the fact that Conte is happy, having got his sort of men like Vidal and Kolarov and Darmian, alas, is also a positive, given that we finished last season with him about to walk out. There's been some players that have moved on that we didn't want. Lazzaro, Dalbert, Jean-Marie should be official tomorrow, going back to Portugal. So there isn't, I think besides Nainggolan, I don't see too many players that Inter were desperate to sell and haven't been able to sell. I think Icardi is worth a mention as well, because he went right at the start and for a good price. That was not guaranteed when the Mercato started, so that was very good. No upgrade on Gagliardini is one of the negatives, I think, because that means Eriksen remains a problem. The shift towards older players over young players is a potential issue, but if we win the Scudetto, I don't care. There's not really a backup to Lukaku, which is a bit of an issue. Godin is a shame. I think obviously that was a financial decision. Maybe not a dependable left-footed wing-back on that side, because Perisic and Kolarov have both got question marks over them. And if I'm being picky, Handanovic is still the first-choice keeper, who's renewed his contract. But maybe we'll leave that for a non-COVID Mercato. That might have been a bit too much this summer.
What about you, Mike?
I'm grading the players going in and out. I'm going to give it a 6.5. But I think this is a distinction that needs to be made this summer. If I'm grading the people who get paid to make transfers, which is Moratti and Ausilio, I'm giving them a 7.5. And the reason for that is this mark got a bit hijacked from them. This is not what they really wanted to do in a lot of ways after Hakimi. I think that's obvious. And I think it was if they're thinking big picture and they want to keep the long-term project rolling, I think they did a fantastic job to appease Conte by getting Vidal, Darmian, and Kolarov in for about 5 million euros. You can say whatever you want about them, but the price for that is unreal. They didn't move out anything of real value, I would say, other than Godin. But, by and large, if that's all you're selling, I think you're fine. And I think the big factor, too, is they didn't panic and they didn't sell Skriniar, they didn't sell Eriksen for less than what their value would be. These are 2 players who, if they're deployed correctly, are world-class talents. In a year's time, they might have a different manager anyways who might use them well. But I think the big thing was not just what did they do, but keeping the books clean in the big picture. I said at the end of last week, if they brought in N'Golo Kante for 50 million, given his age and given his style of play, it would have been a disaster. That's something you can't get out of. That's something that hurts you in the long run. Right now, going into next summer, this club is doing really well financially. They're probably going to start in the black because they have an obligation for Pinamonti and for Darmian, but they also have Matteo Politano's money coming due, and I think that's 20-something million euros. So I think they did a great job when their hands were tied to appease their manager, to appease their boss, and also get a squad in here that can compete for the Scudetto. So great work by them, even.
Well, for me,
why I grade them so highly is bigger than just the players in and out.
Right. So for me, I always do it like this. I give a rating for players out and then one for players in, and then divide the sum of that by 2. Players out 8. They did an absolutely phenomenal job in very difficult circumstances, getting rid of a lot of players, from Dalbert to Jean Mario to, you know, all the stuff that, you know, all the things, all the young players they found suitable loan addresses for. I'm a little bit disappointed Ranocchia staying, but they decided that they needed him and Pirola wasn't ready. I'm okay with that. I trust their judgment on that. In terms of players in, six, I think Kolarov is a disaster. I don't care if he was cheap. It's a bad move. He's already conceded, been has his finger in 4 goals conceded. He's not good enough. He's not a wing back. He's not a defender. It's one of those things where Conte has decided that he needs him for whatever reason, but Inter don't, and they're not better for it. But given the length of the contract being 1 year plus 1 option, and that he was cheap, okay, whatever. We can play against Benevento and teams like that, and even if he, you know, causes 3 goals conceded, we're good enough to score 5, 6. So that's what I'm hoping. But Hakimi is a brilliant signing. There's no doubt about that. I think Vidal, for the money he is, for the money they gave, is okay. But above all, and this is why I'm much more positive today, keeping Raja Nainggolan and Milan Skriniar, incredibly important for the growth and development of this club. They are almost like signings. Ivan Perisic deciding that he's going to play as a wingback is also a player with immense quality and experience, and it gives Conte an extra, you know, an extra weapon in his arsenal to use Perisic. A little bit disappointed actually that Victor Moses wasn't able to be brought in on loan, because I think he could have played a role. Because I think Ashraf Hakimi is so damn good that he can play as a left and right wing back. His left foot is pretty damn good, as we saw against Lazio as well. So for me, it's an 8 out, 6 in, divide by 2, that's 7. So I think it's a decent mercato. I think it gives, like you said, Mike, I think what you alluded to is spot on. I think financially it doesn't hurt Inter too much. And I think next summer is definitely time to fix the goalkeeping situation, because Handanovic is past it. I think we can't deny that anymore. You know, he's been one of the best things during the darkest 10 years maybe in Inter's modern history, but it is time to move on. And I think he would be the brilliant backup goalkeeper to hopefully Juan Musso, who I think and hope is the marquee signing next summer. Right, let's quickly Serie A predictions 1 to 6. I'm going to go first. I have a little cheat list here because it's. I think I'm just going to caveat this and preempt this by saying that I think that this season is going to be so much tighter. I think the table is going to be very clearly in 3 parts, and it's going to be the top 6, 7, who I think numbers wise won't be that big of a difference like it's been these past few years between them. I think the bottom 2 are going to be relegated pretty quickly, and I think then going to have a big block in the middle, and I think Juve are going to win. I think Inter are 2nd, Atalanta 3rd, Napoli 4th, Milan 5th, Roma 6th, and Lazio 7th. And I think Spezia, Crotone, and Parma, unfortunately Parma, are being relegated. Mo, what about you?
Yeah, I got similar overall general prediction. I think it's a tight top of the table. I reckon that Inter are going to win. I've said this before. I think this is our season. Feel very good. I surprisingly think that Atalanta are going to come in 2nd, very close to Inter. And I think maybe there's a bit of daylight between them and the 3rd in Juventus. I also think that Napoli are going to finish 4th, and then we're going to be followed in by Milan and Lazio in 5, 6, 6, 5. I don't know, but Milan, Lazio occupying the outside of the top 4 European places. I think in relegation it's probably Spezia, Crotone, and I'd say Udinese.
Yeah, I had the Udinese just above there.
Yeah.
They've been
Exactly.
looking bad for a few years.
Yeah.
Right, Will, what about you?
Yeah, I have Udinese, Crotone, and Spezia getting relegated. And then the top 6, as you said, is really a toss of a coin. I keep changing my mind. I just have something in my mind about Atalanta this season. So I normally go really safe with the Scudetto and go Juventus. I don't think I've predicted anything other than Juventus for the last 6 years. So I'm going to say Atalanta will win the league because they look like the best team in the league at the moment. I say Inter second, Juventus third, Napoli fourth, Milan fifth, Lazio sixth.
Mike?
I will, for relegation, I'll go ahead and I'll play the odds, and we'll just say the same three that went up go right back down. I don't actually believe that will happen, but when I sit there and look at Udinese, I think that Busso and DePaul are too good to keep them, from going down. I thought about Torino, but I don't think Bellotti will let that happen. So we'll say the promoted clubs go right back down. At the top of the table, I said it last week. Until Juventus doesn't win the league, I will pick Juventus to win the league. So they will go first. I will have Inter second, Atalanta third, and Napoli fourth. I will pick Lazio at 5, just because the top of that group is still so good, and Milan at 6, which is above a banged up Roma, but below Lazio because a lot is going to depend on whether Pioli can do it for a full season and whether Ibrahimovic stays healthy, and that's a lot to ask of it. A retread coach and a 39-year-old as brilliant as Ibra is. So Juventus wins the league. We'll say Atalanta actually wins the Coppa. Unfortunately, no silverware for Inter, and hopefully I'm wrong about all of that.
Well, okay. Well, you said Coppa Italia. I think Juve are going to win the Coppa Italia, and I think the Super Cup is going to be won by Napoli, and I think Cristiano Ronaldo is going to win he's going to write the history he wants to write by becoming top goal scorer in England, Spain, and Italy, which is what he wants to do. If we just quickly going back to you there, Mike, who's your Capocannoniere? Who's your Super Coppa winner?
Super Coppa will be. Gosh, I'll pick Juve again for that. And unfortunately, I agree with you on Ronaldo. That was what he wanted. I think I can't put my finger on what this Juve squad will totally do, but there's so many weapons that'll give him space. He's just going to bag a ton of goals this year.
Will, what about you for Coppa Italia, Super Coppa, and Capocannoniere?
I'm with David on the Capocannoniere. I think it could be Lukaku's year, provided we get some penalties, because Lazio and Juventus had a lot of penalties last year. I have got Juventus winning the Super Coppa, and I've got Milan winning the Coppa Italia, which is because I thought they were on the other side of the draw, but they're not. So, but I put Milan, so I'll pick that because they look like they're doing good things.
Nice one. Mo, what about you?
Lukaku for Capocannoniere. I like your call on Milan for the Coppa Italia. Will, I'll go with that, and I think the Napoli are going to win the Super Coppa.
So,
senza titoli per Juventus.
This is, no. It's not gonna happen. It's Pirlo. Everyone likes Pirlo, and it's Juve, and they've done some damn good things in the market. So I don't see how they're not gonna. I actually have them as an outsider in the Champions League as well. I think they're real. I don't like this.
If we get the Scudetto, I'll more than gladly have them have the Champions League, and
I don't ever want them to win the Champions League.
If we break the 10th, if we prevent the 10th Scudetto from happening, I'll give up a Juventus Champions League for that, no doubt.
No, I'd rather they win 100 Scudetti and not a single Champions League because they're obsessed by it. It's more fun that way. Yes, I'm petty. Right. Let's move on to the games against Lazio and Benevento, because they were so different. I mean, the Benevento game, to me, Inter were so unbalanced, and they basically played like, what was it, 2-3-5. Where Conte seems to, in my opinion, after that game, I was like, well, does he? I mean, when he starts talking about Bayern Munich and Man City and he's playing like Atalanta, I'm thinking, well, this Inter is starting to look like a rich man's Atalanta, and they are playing as charming as Harry Redknapp's Tottenham Hotspur, only those teams don't win titles. They were so unbalanced. And I really didn't like it too much. I thought we were way too unbalanced. I don't think it was as much, although it was some of those things were individual errors. Inter were very unbalanced in that game. But then we go into Lazio, and Inter show that they can play balanced. Okay, there were still some defensive things to iron out, but they looked balanced. I mean, in the first game against Benevento, you could have driven a fleet of interstate buses sideways through Inter's midfield. and you wouldn't have hit anyone because there was no one there. That's how unbalanced Inter were. Whereas against Lazio, the different parts of the team, they played like a unit. And Arturo Vidal looked incredibly important. And I liked what Antonio Conte did with Barella in that trequartista role. I thought it was a very interesting. I mean, Mike was talking about Nerazzurri. Just think Raja Nainggolan going into that as well. The three of them in the Champions League. They're going to be a painful team to play. And I think that's good for Inter. I think it gives us options. I still have questions about Christian Eriksen, but we'll do an episode on him a little later on, because I think that is a genuine issue. Because today, based on the Mercato, both Inter and Eriksen were very adamant they wanted to continue together. So clearly they are working on something, and that's a good sign. But I mean, going back to this game, Mo, what if you can contrast those two performances, what did you take away? The positive stuff.
Look, honestly, I really like your analysis of balance. Balance has been a key theme for me when analyzing the teams, and I think balance was really what allowed our Conte's Inter to finish the season off so well last year. And I think Conte spoke about balance in transition and balance in individual interpretations of movement. So I think balance is very important. It was lovely seeing free-flowing attack against Benevento, and of course it's Benevento, so we take the performance with a respectful grain of salt. But I think the team against Lazio was much more reminiscent of a real genuine side that is interpreting a tactical idea and like you say, playing cohesively. And of course, whatever happened by the 60th minute. So maybe ghosts of seasons past, both on Conte's part in interpreting that lull, that early second half lull, or misinterpreting the physical output of the team there. But I think overall it was a better team performance, and like we'll talk about it later. But I think Vidal's role, particularly in Lazio, is very commendable. In the Lazio game, is very commendable.
For sure, Mike. I'm keen to hear what you think. I mean, the Benevento game felt a little bit. Inter were just, even though they were insanely good at attack, it just felt like at any point we could have gone from 3-0 to 3-3. Not because Benevento were that good, but because of the fact that Inter kept dropping the ball and looked so unbalanced. And then you go into the Lazio game and it's the exact opposite of that. Obviously, they're working on finding the perfect balance, and that's work in progress. But what did you make of it? If based on these two games, I mean, the first, these first three games, what do you take away going into the derby?
I don't even know what to take away. And that's what, a week ago when we were previewing this, I was saying, I want to know, they're going to try some things. They're going to see what works and what doesn't. And I think they're slightly closer to figuring out what they want in their midfield, and that, I think going into the year, Nicolo Barella was going to be involved as much as possible. I think Conte is going to lean a lot on Vidal as that second guy. The Lazio match was frustrating just because, like you said, this was a total pendulum swing. And on the one hand, they did dictate tempo. They did dictate some possession in the first half. But the problem was they weren't creating any chances. And that goal that they scored, that felt like a 2017 goal with Ivan Perisic running around trying to do something, creates a half chance that wasn't even that great, but a certain clinical Argentine striker figures it out and makes it work. That was a Mauro Icardi goal that Lautaro scored. And the problem is that 3 years ago, that was all they could do. There was no midfield creativity. Now it doesn't have to be this way. And you're going out, against a team that, yes, it's away from home. Yes, Lazio is a good side, but nobody here, none of us are picking Lazio to be in the top four, right? You go to Lazio and you have the squad that Inter has, and you're going to win the title. I want to see them dictate play a little more, and especially that we after the fact, look, a point against Lazio in Rome is good. It's an improved result over last year. But if you had told us before this match that Lazio's already weak back line would be so patchwork that Parola would be playing center back and that they'd be playing up a man for half an hour and the man dismissed is Ciro Immobile, I'd say, great, they're the 3 points in the bag. If you're going to win the Scudetto, you got to take 3 points in that scenario. And, some of it is obviously on the players in the field to execute, but the first 45, 50 minutes, I don't think they were being, as aggressive or as much protagonists as they should be when they have a clear, better squad. So I don't know. I want to see what the midfield is moving forward. Again, I think they're going to still be throwing things around to see what works, but I don't think they've found that balance yet. I think that's going to be ongoing.
Sorry, Will. Well, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, mostly positive. I mean, my biggest regret from that match against Lazio is that we've given more oxygen to the most annoying coach in Europe. We stopped Inter with Parolo at centre back and all his self-congratulation, which gets, being serious. It was the right result, I think, but it is also 2 points dropped given the way that the match developed. Inter let the match really slip from their grasp for 15, 20 minutes in the second half. Could have found themselves 2-1 down had Lazio been a bit more clinical with the chances they had. Then they got it back under control. But I do agree with Mike that I thought the first half was a little bit lacking in creativity. I don't know if that's because Brozovic, Sensi, and Eriksson were all on the bench, and it was a much more muscular midfield. But I felt that was a detrimental factor in the first half in terms of the way that we were bringing the ball forward, because it seemed a little bit laborious. But I'm not that bothered about a draw in Rome. That's not why we'd lose the Scudetto if we end up not winning it. The Benevento game was a bit weird. We could have scored 10. We could have conceded 5. The thing that I took away from it was the Hakimi-Lukaku partnership. That was kind of, the new sort of version of Perisic to Icardi. We've now got an upgrade on that hashtag that Inter launched a few years ago. We've now got Hakimi to Lukaku, and I think that's going to produce a lot of goals. But, if these were matches that were taking place in December and January, I'd be a bit more concerned. But, ultimately it's right at the start. We haven't had a pre-season. Vidal has already made a great impact. Hakimi's made a great impact. And there are a lot of things that can be improved. So in that sense, I feel, a little bit frustrated that we didn't win the game against Lazio. But ultimately, I think there's a lot that can get better. And I'm not feeling. I'm okay. I think we can be reasonably satisfied with how things have started.
No, for sure. I mean, it's a tough start. Fiorentina, Lazio, and then Milan. I mean, it's not the same start that Milan have had against Crotone and Spezia. So this is a difficult start for sure. And Inter have come away with 7 points out of 9, and I think that's decent. That's really decent. Right. We didn't speak about Alexis Sanchez, but I mean, he's there and he's brilliant. And when he looks like this, he is absolutely phenomenal and unplayable. And to have him as an option, and I think that's I think Conte is going to rotate a lot this season. I think based on what he said and how he's approaching it, and especially what he said after the Lazio game, he says he's calling on everyone to be prepared to play because
he has no choice.
Yeah, he has no choice. Yeah, it's so cramped, but now he has options, and that means that with Raja Nainggolan staying, it means that I won't have to see Roberto Gagliardini play as much, which is only good for Inter. So
you'll see him. He'll play.
Stop saying that. I know it's true.
He's gone. He's going to come back in there.
I forgot to say on the Lazio game, one of the biggest positives was how lovely is that third kit. I was getting 1998 vibe from it. It was gorgeous. Lautaro suited it very well, I thought, when he was scoring.
Peach. Absolute peach.
For sure. Right. Right. Let's move on to the part of the show, because next week because next week obviously it's the international break, so we will be doing a pod, but we will be previewing the derby and focus entirely on the derby next week. So we won't be talking about that right now because it's a week away before we really can begin talking about it. And by then we'll also know if Zlatan Ibrahimovic is back and if Inter or Milan, both of these clubs have avoided contracting more COVID-19 players who've contracted that, given that some of them are going to travel to play with their international teams, etc., etc. So it's all it's all a very weird reality right now. But let's move on to the part of the show where we pay tribute, rip the piss out of, and criticize someone or something heavily in the world of football, starting with the positivity. This week's Moratti, which we presented by Mr. Mystic Mo, Mohammed Nassar.
He works a lot, he's intelligent, and he surprises people sometimes with his ideas. Not easy to find one person of this qualities.
Yeah, I'll pay you the royalty or use the Mystic Mo later. Look, honestly, it's been a tough week for a standout. So I think we've mentioned Arturo Vidal's performance against Lazio, but I'm not singling out his performance on the pitch in terms of just gameplay. But I think the cattiveria which is something that we missed very much against Sevilla. We spoke about the Sevilla, the post-Sevilla final and the Europa League, and how Sevilla showed maturity in how they managed the game, and just a general sense of experience. And it seemed like it wasn't their first rodeo. And I feel like this is the sense I got when with Vidal on the pitch. You don't want to see someone retaliating to a foul, but just that particular incident and winding Immobile up to the point where he had to lash out against him, and he got sent off rightly so. I don't think there's any controversy in the sending off. I think it's a very legitimate sending off, and it is what it is. But that sort of maturity in managing matches, managing individual instances is something that we've lacked for a long time, and for that I single out Arturito for his presence on the pitch.
Okay, controversial. Right, let's move on to something much more negative. This week's Moggi, which will be presented by Mr. Mike Pilucci.
Transfer market. Let's give a shout out to two of the most annoying clubs that Inter have done business with lately. I'm talking about Cagliari and Tottenham Hotspur. Why? Because when it came time last summer to buy Nicolo Barella, was Cagliari willing to bargain? No. Do they want to go elsewhere and make a sale until Nicolo Barella forced their hand to go to Inter? Yes. So what do they do this time around? Diego Godin has to be there for free, and Inter have to help with the wages. Raja Nainggolan, he has to come for free. We're so poor. We can't afford it. No, we can't work with you. No.
It's so annoying, isn't it?
It's to so 10 million euros. It's the worst. And Tottenham going out there, every penny they demand of 20 million for Christian Eriksen. Every penny. When it comes time to ask for a 25-year-old center back in Milan Skriniar, well, maybe 30. Maybe 30 is okay. That seems fair, right? That seems fair. And every annoying... You and Alex Dono did the Lord's work on Inter Twitter dealing with their trolls. Truly incredible. So, look, there will be times when... Shout out, Alex. I mean, there will be times in the future when Inter deal with both clubs. It's business. It's nothing that awful. But at the end of the day, just so obnoxious that they don't, they want everything to be on their terms. And they don't want to, when it comes time for them to be doing the buying, they expect all the discounts in the world. Just terrible.
For sure, but I'm glad that this time around Inter stood their ground, and I'm really happy about that.
That's a Moratti thing, right? Pepe don't get pushed around.
No. Inter don't get pushed around. He's as cool as ice, and he just looks you in the eye and says no. So and he did that all the way. He didn't let anyone bully him, and I love him for that. So big shout out to Marotta for that. Right, let's move on to this week something much more comical. This week's Frog, which we presented by Mr. William Beckman.
Clamoroso! Autogol di Ranocchia!
Yes, toilet humour is the order of the day. The Frog of the week. It's Eric Dyer, who played for the aforementioned Tottenham Hotspur. Had a very unfortunate incident in the Carabao Cup last Tuesday when they played Chelsea. Spurs were losing, and suddenly with 15 minutes left, Jose Mourinho is pictured walking angrily away from the pitch and down the tunnel, followed in bemusement by the camera crew that were in by the cameras that were in the sort of I don't know what you call this, the area outside the dressing room before you come out onto the pitch. Nobody really could work out what would happen, but it turned out that later on he'd followed Eric Dyer down the tunnel back into the dressing room because Eric Dyer had to run away for a very impromptu comfort break. He said afterwards that Jose wasn't very happy, but I had to go. Nature was calling. Apparently he had stomach cramps, so he had to, and it got too bad, in his word. So when he asked where he was going, Dyer said, "Well, everyone can imagine. There was nothing I could do about it." Jose came out and spoke to it afterwards as well. He was in obviously a chipper mood because Spurs got the win in the end on penalties. But he said something that caught my eye. He had to go. He had no choice. I went off behind him because I understood immediately what was happening, and I went there to try to make it happen faster. I tried to put pressure on him because we needed him to come back. I'm not sure Jose understands how comfort breaks work. But can you just imagine that having Mourinho chase you as you go to the bathroom? That would be a really harrowing experience, I think. Gary Lineker obviously had
funny.
Yeah, Gary Lineker had a very funny take on Twitter, because obviously 30 years ago he very famously
pooed himself
on the pitch. In one of England's
and was
World Cup
dragging
matches in
himself
Italy.
across the
said,
grass like a cat. It was so funny.
Yeah, quite harrowing. But he said on Twitter at the time, presumably Dyer needed the loo, players just don't poo on the pitch anymore. What's wrong with them? Which is a nice bit of self-deprecation. I would also like to have two honorary mentions, because they caught my eye today. Barcelona's social media manager had a bit of a faux pas earlier. They put out a tweet about Ansu Fati being marked by two Sevilla players, and I think it must have got lost in translation, because the caption for this picture was that wow, he's 17 and he's already being double teamed, which was which got quite a bit of traction in the replies. So that was swiftly deleted. I don't think they quite thought that through. And also, I mean, this could really be a Moggi, the whole Juventus-Napoli situation. But I think Andrea Agnelli needs a shout out for telling us yesterday on live television with no sense of sarcasm that Juventus abide by the rules. So that deserves a shout as well, because let's go back and check what the number is that they have on the Juventus stadium. I don't think that's abiding by the rules, is it? So congratulations for
what a mess. I mean, not just that. I mean, the Serie A just this past few. I mean, what a mess! What an absolute mess they've made of it. And we can't blame Juventus too much for that. Sure, it was ridiculous to promote the game the way they did on Twitter. Was a bit childish. But they had to turn up. They had no choice. It's the Serie A.
Otherwise, they're breaking the protocol as well.
Yeah, exactly. They had to come up there. They had to do all of that. They had to go through all of that pantomime, because the Serie A is run by idiots, and it's so embarrassing. The whole thing was just such a giant shit. Oh, it was so embarrassing.
And incredibly predictable, and
very predictable, and also avoidable. So avoidable. Because the protocols are very clear. When a health authority says you can't play, you can't play. It's as simple as that. Even though they literally hadn't written in the letter, you can't play. They said you have to be in quarantine. But I mean, then again, that kind of means if you're in quarantine, you can't play. I don't.
There are two sort of protocols that contradict each other. There's the one that the government have given to all the local and regional authorities for how to sort of deal with these situations. But then you've got the league's one, which has been exposed as basically a lame protocol, because it's at the behest of all these regional authorities. So it's almost a bit of a short circuit. But they've got 2 weeks to sort everything out. So I'm sure that the Italy's football authorities will get their heads together and sort something out. They've never caused chaos before. So
exactly, what could possibly go wrong?
Cooperation in the world.
Jesus, it's unbelievable. The Serie A they never miss an opportunity to make any situation any worse, do they?
No.
It's really, really rather remarkable by them that they always do that.
No.
Yeah, and the season's only 3 days old.
And it already feels like it could end in a month, given the domino effect that could be set off. Does this qualify for the Italian hokey cokey that you love, Nima?
Yeah, definitely. It's the Italian okey doke. This is pretending shit that the stuff doesn't happen and sweeping it under the rug until it absolutely explodes. But this is just so dysfunctional. It's incredibly dysfunctional what they do, and I don't know. It is what it is. It's the Serie A. It's Italy. What are you gonna do? Yeah. Anyway, I wanna. That was all we had time for this week. We'll be doing a full preview of the Derby della Madonnina next week, and we'll be talking more about whatever has happened in the world of Inter. And given that it's the Serie A and Inter, there'll be things to talk about. So I want to thank Mr. David Amoyal for coming on again, and I also want to thank you, Mo.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, and thank you for churning out those previews in this ridiculous tempo. I feel really bad harassing you about them. And also, Mr. Mike Pialucci.
Pleasure as always. Thanks for having me.
It's always a pleasure. And Mr. William Beckman.
Goodbye, everyone, and goodbye especially to Samuele Longo, who this evening left Inter on a permanent deal.
I never
could
thought
not
that.
believe my eyes.
I never thought that would happen until the day he actually hung up his boots. But it happened today.
End of an era. He's gone.
End
to
of an
Brother
this
Longo,
end of
win
an-
for a transfer fee. Alexis
Yeah.
Sanchez.
No
did
more.
that.
No more summer tournée with Longo up front against Paris Saint-Germain.
It
It's
is
all.
the end of an era. We can say that the triple era died today.
Is this officially the end of the banter era? Longo leaving?
No, Ranocchia's still there.
Okay. Well,
When
we'll
he
see.
leaves next summer, it's the end of the bank. Officially end of the banter era.
Yeah.
Anyway, until next week, I'm your host Nima Tavallaey, wishing you a happy end of Mercato. May you have a nice international break, and until next week, it is sempre e solo Forza Inter.